Have you ever been treated like a literal piece of furniture? My name is Leo, and for the last 3 weeks, I've been the ghost of Sterling and Associates. I'm the guy who fetches the sugar-free lattes, staples the 400-page reports, and gets called "Hey you" by a CEO who wears suits that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. CEO Marcus Thorne thinks I'm just another faceless intern, a kid with a cheap tie and a desperate need for a resume credit. He has no idea that Thorne doesn't actually own this firm. He's just a glorified tenant. My father is the silent partner who owns the holding company that keeps this place afloat, and I'm here on a secret audit to see if Thorne is as toxic as the rumors say. Spoiler alert, he's worse. Today, he just threw a lukewarm coffee at my chest because it was too wet. Tomorrow, I'm going to show him exactly what happens when you treat the landlord's son like a doormat. Welcome to ThreadVerse. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like descending into a very expensive, very cold version of purgatory. I adjusted my tie in the polished chrome doors. It was a $20 tie from a department store. I could have worn an Hermes, but that would have ruined the cover. I was Leo Vance, on paper, a junior at a state college looking for corporate experience. In reality, I was the heir to Vance Global, the firm that owned the very steel and glass surrounding me. My father, Julian Vance, you might remember him, had sent me here with a simple mission. Leo, find out if Marcus Thorne is the leader he claims to be, or the bully the whistleblowers describe. If he's a lion, we keep him. If he's a jackal, we cage him. The doors chimed, and I stepped into a lobby that looked more like a museum than an office. White marble, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and a reception desk that probably cost 50 grand. Name? The receptionist asked, not even looking up from her monitor. She looked like she hadn't slept since the fiscal year started. Leo, the new intern for the executive suite. She finally looked up, her eyes scanning my off-the-rack blazer with a mix of pity and boredom. Right. Room 4205. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't use the executive espresso machine. And whatever you do, don't look Mr. Thorne in the eye before he's had his first 3 phone calls. Good luck, kid. You're gonna need it. I walked down the hall, passing rows of glass-walled offices where people looked like they were terrified of their own keyboards. The air was thick with the scent of high-end cologne and low-level anxiety. This wasn't a workplace. It was a kingdom built on fear. By 10 a.m., I'd already been tasked with shredding 6 months of miscellaneous expense reports. My hands were covered in paper dust and ink. That's when the door to the corner office swung open. Marcus Thorne stepped out. He was exactly what I expected. Tall, tanned, with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. He was shouting into a gold-plated iPhone while a terrified assistant scrambled after him with a tablet. I don't care about the margins, Stevens. I want those workers off the payroll by Friday. If they wanted job security, they should have been born into a different zip code. Thorne barked. He stopped in front of my desk. He didn't look at my face. He looked at my hands. You, the new blood. Where's my latte? I wasn't told you needed one, Mr. Thorne, I said, keeping my voice level and polite. Thorne froze. The assistant behind him turned a ghostly shade of white. Thorne slowly lowered his phone and leaned over my desk, his shadow looming over my shredder. You weren't told? He whispered, a dangerous edge to his voice. I am the CEO of this firm. You are a fly on the wall. It is the fly's job to know when the king is thirsty. Get me a triple shot, sugar-free, oat milk latte. And if it's under 170 degrees when it touches my desk, you can pack your little backpack and find a job at a car wash. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked away, laughing at something his phone said. I stood there for a moment, the paper dust settling on my cheap blazer. I looked at the executive espresso machine, the one I was forbidden to use. I could have bought that machine, the beans, and the whole damn floor in a single afternoon. Hey, the assistant whispered, grabbing my arm. Just go. There's a Starbucks 3 blocks down. Use the service elevator. He hates seeing interns in the main lobby during business hours. I nodded, grabbed my wallet, and headed for the service elevator. As the doors closed on the 42nd floor, I pulled out my own phone. I sent a one-word text to my father's head of security. Phase 1, confirmed. He's a jackal. The Starbucks was packed with the usual morning rush. I stood in line, smelling like ink and sweat, while people in yoga pants and business casual chatted around me. When I finally got back to the office, I was 5 minutes late. I walked into Thorne's office. He was sitting behind a desk made of solid obsidian, staring at a monitor filled with red lines. You're late, he said, not looking up. The line was long, sir. Here is your latte. I set the cup down on a coaster. Thorne picked it up, took a sip, and immediately spat it back into the cup. It's lukewarm, he sneered. He looked at the cup, then at me. And you got the wrong milk. This is almond, not oat. Are you illiterate, Leo? Or just stupid? I'm fairly sure I ordered oat, sir. Perhaps they made a mistake. I don't pay for mistakes. Thorne roared. He picked up the cup and, without even blinking, threw the contents toward me. The latte splashed across my chest, the heat soaking into my white shirt. It wasn't boiling, but it was enough to sting. More than the sting, though, was the humiliation. Look at you. Thorne laughed, gesturing to the stain. You look like a wet dog. That shirt probably cost you $20, right? Here. He pulled a crisp $100 bill from his leather wallet and flicked it at me. It fluttered through the air and landed in the puddle of coffee on the floor. Go buy a new one. And don't come back until you've learned how to follow a simple instruction. Actually, don't come back to this office at all today. You're on supply closet duty. I want every stapler in this building inventoried by hand. I looked at the $100 bill soaking up the latte on the floor. I looked at the man who thought he could buy my dignity for a Benjamin. Thank you, Mr. Thorne, I said, my voice as cold as ice. I'll get right on that inventory. As I walked out, I didn't go to the supply closet. I went to the bathroom, stripped off the ruined shirt, and threw it in the trash. I pulled a spare from my bag. This one was a $400 Egyptian cotton button-down I'd kept for emergencies. I looked at myself in the mirror. The intern was gone. The owner was starting to wake up. Marcus Thorne thought he was punishing me by sending me to the supply closet. In his mind, I was spending my afternoon counting paperclips in a windowless room as a lesson in humility. What he didn't realize was that in a firm like Sterling & Associates, the supply closet isn't just for stationery. It's the graveyard where inconvenient truths go to die. The closet was located in the sub-basement, a place the cleaning crew barely visited. The air was thick with the scent of old cardboard, ozone from the nearby server room, and decades of dust. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long, rhythmic shadows across rows of gray metal shelving. I didn't start with the staplers. I headed straight for the archive section at the back. As the son of the man who built Vance Global, I knew how these legacy firms worked. Thorne had been the CEO for 3 years, and in that time, the miscellaneous expenses column had ballooned by 400%. I began pulling dusty black binders from the bottom shelves. These were the raw ledger printouts from the previous fiscal year, the ones Thorne's digital cleanup crew likely forgot existed. Let's see where the bodies are buried, Marcus, I whispered, opening a binder labeled Operational Overhead Q3. My eyes scanned the rows of numbers. I wasn't looking for big, flashy thefts. I was looking for the paper-cut fraud. $10,000 here for consulting fees to a company called MT Holdings. $5,000 there for venue logistics to a firm registered in the Caymans. MT, Marcus Thorne. The guy wasn't even creative. He was siphoning off millions in small, untraceable increments, thinking no one would ever look at the physical paper trail. I pulled out my phone and began scanning pages. Every snap of the camera shutter felt like a nail in Thorne's professional coffin. I wasn't just an intern anymore. I was a forensic accountant with a blood feud. Around 3 p.m., the heavy door to the supply room creaked open. I quickly slid a binder back onto the shelf and grabbed a box of pens, pretending to be deeply invested in the count. It wasn't Thorne. It was Martha, the senior administrative assistant I'd seen in the lobby. She was carrying a stack of empty boxes, her shoulders slumped, her eyes red-rimmed. "Oh, hello, Leo," she said, her voice sounding brittle. "I didn't know you were still down here." Thorne said he sent the coffee boy to do a life sentence in the basement. "Just finishing the inventory, Martha," I said, stepping toward her. I noticed her hands were shaking. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Martha set the boxes down on a table and let out a long, shaky sigh. "Not a ghost, just a termination notice. 22 years, Leo. I've been with this firm since it was just 5 people in a rented suite. I worked for Mr. Sterling himself. And today, Marcus Thorne told me my position is being automated to save on the quarterly EBITDA projections." My chest tightened. Martha was the institutional memory of this place. She knew every client's birthday. She knew how to fix the printer when the technicians gave up. She was the heart of the office. "He's firing you? Now." He said the firm needs young, hungry energy. He offered me 2 weeks severance. 2 weeks for 22 years. She wiped a tear away with the back of her hand, trying to maintain her dignity. He told me if I made a scene, he'd fight my unemployment claim. He's a monster, Leo. He treats people like used tissues. I looked at this woman, someone my father would have treated with the utmost respect, and I felt a cold, white-hot rage settle into my bones. "Don't pack your boxes yet, Martha," I said, my voice low and steady. "What? Leo, you're just an intern. You can't do anything. Just trust me. Take the rest of the day off. Go home, put your feet up, and don't sign a single document Thorne gives you. I have a feeling the automation plan is going to hit a major glitch by Monday." She looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time, She noticed the quality of my shirt. She noticed the way I stood, not like a kid afraid of his boss, but like a man who owned the room. "Who are you, Leo?" she whispered. "I'm the guy who's about to turn Marcus Thorne's young, hungry energy against him," I said. "Now go. I've got some more staplers to count." After Martha left, I went back to the ledgers with a new intensity. It wasn't just about the MT holdings anymore. I found something much bigger, the ghost payroll. Thorne had been keeping 12 former employees on the digital payroll for over a year. Their salaries were being deposited into a centralized account, the same one he used for his consulting fees. He wasn't just stealing from the firm. He was stealing from the very people he had fired. I logged into the internal Vance global server using my encrypted tablet. As the heir, I had level 7 clearance, something Thorne didn't even know existed. I cross-referenced the names. Bingo. 3 of those ghost employees were actually deceased. Thorne was literally stealing from the dead to fund his lifestyle. I felt a wave of nausea, followed by a sharp, clear sense of purpose. This wasn't just corporate mismanagement. This was a criminal enterprise. I spent the next 2 hours mapping the money flow. It all led back to a final destination, the Excellence Gala. Thorne was hosting a massive charity event on Saturday night. He was inviting the city's elite, including my father, to announce a global expansion that didn't exist. He was using the stolen funds to throw a $5 million party to distract the investors from the fact that the firm was actually bleeding out. He was going to use my father's presence as a seal of approval to secure a new round of funding, then jump ship with the cash before the whole house of cards collapsed. "Not on my watch, Marcus," I said, closing the final binder. "You want a show? I'll give you a show." Friday morning arrived, and Thorne was in panic mode. The 42nd floor was a whirlwind of florists, caterers, and frantic assistants. Thorne spotted me near the elevators. He looked stressed, his hair slightly disheveled, but his arrogance was still at a 10. "You? Intern," he shouted, snapping his fingers. "The stage for the gala. The centerpiece is a 300-pound ice sculpture of a lion. The delivery crew is shorthanded. You and the other low levels are going to help them move it into the ballroom." "I'm an intern, Mr. Thorne, not a mover," I said, keeping my tone neutral. Thorne walked up to me, his face inches from mine. "You are whatever I tell you to be. If I tell you to be a pack mule, you'll start braying. If that ice sculpture so much as gets a scratch, I'll personally ensure you never work in this city again. Do you understand?" He looked down at my Egyptian cotton shirt. He sneered. "Nice shirt, Leo. Trying to play dress up? It doesn't change the fact that you're a nobody. Now, get to the loading dock." I spent the next 4 hours hauling ice, moving heavy mahogany tables, and being barked at by Thorne every time he passed by. He used me as his personal punching bag in front of the high-end vendors, mocking my soft hands and my college boy attitude. "Look at him." Thorne laughed to a group of investors who had arrived early. "The next generation of business leaders. Can't even carry a chair without breaking a sweat. This is why we need old guard leadership like mine." I didn't say a word. I just kept moving. Because with every chair I sat, I was placing a hidden camera. With every table I moved, I was ensuring the microphones were synced to the main server. By 6 p.m., the ballroom was perfect. The ice lion was in place, the gold leaf podium was ready, and Thorne was beaming with pride. "All right, everyone out," Thorne shouted. "Gala starts at 8. Intern, you're on cloakroom duty tonight. I don't want to see your face in the main room. You'll take the coats of the real men and women who run this world." "I wouldn't miss it for the world, sir," I said, wiping a drop of melted ice from my forehead. "Good. Now get lost. You smell like a dock worker." I walked out of the ballroom, but I didn't go to the cloakroom. I went to the penthouse suite I'd booked under a different name 3 floors above. I took a long, hot shower, washing away the dust of the basement and the sweat of the loading dock. I put on a custom-made tuxedo, adjusted my cufflinks, the ones with the Vance global crest, and checked my watch. 7:45 p.m. The Lion was about to meet the Landlord. The grand ballroom looked like a fever dream of corporate excess. At 8:30 p.m., the room was a sea of black ties, silk gowns, and the clinking of crystal flutes. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the desperate, artificial laughter of people trying to climb the social ladder. In the center of it all stood the Ice Lion, glistening under the blue spotlights. It was a masterpiece of arrogance, just like the man who commissioned it. I stood on the mezzanine balcony, invisible in the shadows. My tuxedo was a bespoke masterpiece, fitting me like a second skin. I watched Marcus Thorne through the gold-rimmed sights of a champagne glass. He was in his element, gliding through the crowd, shaking hands, and whispering lies into the ears of people who controlled billions. "Ah, Senator, so glad you could make it," Thorne's voice boomed, projecting across the room. We're just about to announce the expansion. Sterling and Associates is going global, and we're taking the city's heritage with us." He was a predator in his natural habitat. He looked like a leader, acted like a visionary, and smelled like success. But I could see the sweat on his temples. I knew that his primary bank account was currently being drained by a court-ordered freeze I'd initiated an hour ago. I tapped my earpiece. "Marcus, is the feed ready?" "Ready and waiting, Leo," my assistant's voice crackled. The moment he hits the podium, every screen in this room, and every tablet in the hands of the press, will receive the MT Holdings packet. "Wait for my signal," I said. I want him to feel like he's won before we remind him that he's just a tenant. The room suddenly went quiet. The heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Julian Vance, my father, stepped into the room. He didn't need to shout to get attention. He carried a gravity that made everyone else in the room look like a satellite orbiting a sun. He was the landlord. He was the man who owned the very air Thorne was breathing. Thorne's face lit up like a Christmas tree. He practically sprinted across the marble floor to greet him. "Mr. Vance." "Julian, it is an absolute honor," Thorne said, extending a hand that was visibly shaking. "I'm so glad you could see the fruits of our labor. We've trimmed the fat, optimized the workforce, and we're ready for the next level." My father took his hand, his expression unreadable. "I've heard a lot about your optimization, Marcus. You've been very busy. Efficiency is the name of the game, sir. We actually had to let go of some legacy staff recently, including an intern who was quite a disappointment. A kid named Leo, completely incompetent. I had him moving ice and taking coats just to give him some sense of what real work looks like." I saw my father's jaw tighten, just a fraction of an inch. "Is that so?" Julian asked, his voice low and dangerous. "And where is this Leo now?" "Oh, probably in the cloakroom, fumbling with someone's mink," Thorne laughed, leaning in close. "Some people just aren't built for the 42nd floor, you know? They belong in the basement." "You might be surprised where people belong, Marcus," my father said, stepping past him. "I believe you have a speech to give." Thorne practically floated to the podium. He took a long, dramatic sip of water and adjusted the microphone. The two massive 80-inch LED screens on either side of the stage displayed the Sterling and Associates logo, a gold lion. "Ladies and gentlemen, investors and friends," Thorne began, his voice silky and confident. "Tonight, we don't just celebrate a firm. We celebrate a philosophy of strength. Like the lion you see before you, Sterling and Associates doesn't ask for permission. We take what is ours. We hunt, we grow, and we eliminate the weak." The crowd applauded. Thorne beamed. "To achieve this growth, I've had to make difficult decisions. I've had to move funds, restructure accounts, and ensure our capital is working as hard as our people. Now," I whispered into my earpiece. The LED screens flickered. The gold line disappeared. In its place, a complex flowchart appeared. It was a digital map of the MT Holdings embezzlement trail. The crowd went silent. The senators and CEOs squinted at the screens. Thorne didn't see it yet. He was too busy looking at my father. And as we move into the European markets, Thorne stopped. He noticed the senator in the front row pointing at the screen with a look of pure horror. Thorne turned around. The screen changed. It now showed a list of the 12 ghost employees. Next to each name was their death certificate and the date their salary was deposited into Thorne's personal account. What is this?" Thorne stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "This is a glitch. Technical. Someone hacked." "It's not a hack, Marcus," a voice boomed from the back of the room. I stepped out of the shadows, walking down the center aisle. I wasn't wearing the cheap blazer. I wasn't carrying a tray. I looked like exactly what I was, the heir to the empire. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Thorne stared at me, his eyes wide, his mouth hanging open like a landed fish. "Leo," he whispered, "what are you? Get off the stage." "Security. Security is currently busy letting the police into your office, Marcus," I said, stepping up onto the stage. I looked at the crowd, then back at the man who had thrown coffee at my chest. "My name is Leo Vance. I'm the disappointment you had moving ice this afternoon. And while I was fumbling with minks in the cloakroom, I was actually authorizing the termination of your lease." You're a Vance?" Thorne's knees literally buckled. He grabbed the podium for support. "I'm the Vance who inventoried your supply closet," I said, my voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "The one where you kept the physical ledgers of your thefts. The ones you thought were too legacy to matter." I turned to the screens. "You talked about eliminating the weak, Marcus. But in my world, the weak aren't the people who work 22 years to build a firm. The weak are the ones who steal from the dead because they're too lazy to earn a living." The doors at the back of the room burst open again. This time, it wasn't a guest. It was 4 officers from the Financial Crimes Division. They marched down the aisle, the sound of their boots on the marble sounding like a funeral march. Thorne tried to run, but he tripped over the power cord for the spotlights. He fell hard, landing right at the base of his ice lion. "Marcus Thorne," the lead officer said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "You're under arrest for grand larceny, embezzlement, and 12 counts of identity theft." As they hauled him up, Thorne looked at my father, who was standing at the edge of the stage. "Julian, help me. It was a mistake. I can explain the accounts." My father didn't even look at him. He looked at me and nodded. "Wait," I said to the officers. They stopped. I walked over to Thorne. He was crying now, his expensive suit rumpled, his old guard dignity shattered. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single, crumpled $100 bill, the one he had flicked at me in the coffee puddle. I tucked it into his breast pocket. "Go buy a new shirt, Marcus," I whispered. "I hear the ones they give you in state prison are a bit common." The officers led him away to the sound of absolute silence. Thorne's Excellence Gala had become his own public execution. I turned back to the crowd. "The bar is still open, ladies and gentlemen. But I have one more announcement." I looked at Martha, who was standing near the entrance, her mouth covered by her hands. "Martha, please come forward." She walked up, trembling. I took the microphone. Effective immediately, Martha is being reinstated as the Senior Vice President of Operations. And the automation plan? It's been canceled. We're doubling the severance for anyone Marcus Thorne fired in the last year, and offering them their jobs back with a 20% raise. The room erupted. It wasn't the fake, corporate applause from earlier. It was real. I walked off the stage and found my father. He put a hand on my shoulder. "So," he said, a small smile on his face. "How was the coffee?" "Lukewarm," I said, straightening my tie. "But the revenge?" "That was served exactly at 170 degrees. Monday morning at Sterling & Associates didn't feel like a normal workday. It felt like the day after a liberation. The Excellence Gala was over. The police tape had been removed from the 42nd floor, and the hum of the air conditioning seemed less like a mechanical buzz and more like the building was finally breathing again. I arrived at 8 a.m. I wasn't wearing the cheap department store blazer, nor was I wearing the Gala tuxedo. I wore a simple, high-quality navy suit, the kind that speaks of authority without needing to scream it. I found Martha in the lobby. She was standing by the reception desk, clutching a coffee cup. Her eyes were bright, and she was wearing a dress I hadn't seen before, a deep emerald green that matched the new energy in the room. "Good morning, Madam Vice President," I said, smiling. Martha laughed, a sound that was finally free of the brittle fear she'd carried for years. "Leo, I still can't believe it. I've spent the weekend on the phone. We've reached out to 38 people Thorne fired in the last 6 months. Do you know what their reactions were?" "I can guess," I said. "Most of them thought it was a prank. One guy, an analyst Thorne fired for taking a 3-day paternity leave, actually started crying. He's coming back on Wednesday. He said he'd work for free just to see the look on the empty corner office." "He won't be working for free," I said firmly. "We're initiating the Vance protocol. Every person Thorne wrongfully terminated is getting a signing bonus equal to the severance they were denied, plus a cost of living adjustment." We walked into the boardroom. I didn't sit at the head of the table. I sat next to Martha. We spent the next 4 hours going through the digital debris Thorne had left behind. My forensic team had already identified every shadow account and ghost entry. "The damage is extensive, Martha," I said, pointing to the monitor. "He didn't just steal money. He stole the firm's credibility. He'd been inflating our ESG scores and lying to the regulators about our carbon footprint. He wasn't just a thief. He was a fraud in every sense of the word." "How do we fix it?" she asked. "By being boring," I replied. "Transparency. We release a full audit. We admit the mistakes. And we show the world that Sterling & Associates isn't the lion on the wall. It's the people in the cubicles." By noon, the elevators were constantly chiming. People were coming back. Not just the fired employees, but the ones who had been hiding in their offices for years, too afraid to speak. The shadow of the Jackal was gone. On Thursday, I took a drive I'd been dreading but knew I had to make. I went to the county detention center. The atmosphere was a far cry from the 42nd floor. It smelled of floor wax, old sweat, and industrial soup. I sat in a small, windowless room with a plexiglass barrier between me and the chair on the other side. The door opened, and Marcus Thorne was let in by a guard. He looked unrecognizable. The tan had faded into a sickly, fluorescent-lit gray. His hair, usually styled to perfection, was matted and oily. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. He looked small. He looked like the nobody he had always been afraid of becoming. He sat down and picked up the phone. I did the same. "You look like you're enjoying the supply closet life, Marcus," I said, my voice echoing in the small plastic receiver. Thorne didn't snarl. He didn't scream. He just stared at me with a hollow, hungry desperation. What do you want, Leo? You won. You have the firm. You have the money. Why are you here? I'm here to give you an update, I said. I thought you'd like to know that your personal villa in Tuscany? It was sold yesterday. The proceeds didn't go into the firm's accounts, though. They went into a trust fund for the families of the 12 people you kept on the ghost payroll. Their children are going to college on your consulting fees, Marcus. Thorne's hand tightened on the receiver until his knuckles were white. That was my house. I earned that. I did the deals. You didn't do deals. You moved numbers around while other people did the work. You treated the world like a game of Monopoly, but you forgot that in the real world, the banker is usually the one who gets caught. My lawyers will find a way out, he hissed. This is a white-collar crime. I'll be out in 3 years. Actually, I leaned in closer to the glass. I had my team look into your offshore accounts, the ones you thought were hidden. We found evidence of money laundering for some very unpleasant international entities. The feds are taking the case now. You aren't looking at 3 years in a club-fed prison, Marcus. You're looking at 20 years in a maximum security facility. The color drained from Thorne's face. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a total, unadulterated terror. 20 years, he whispered. 20 years, I confirmed. I've also authorized the firm to sue you civilly for every cent of the legal fees. You're not just going to prison, Marcus. You're going to be broke. When you finally walk out of those gates as an old man, you'll have exactly as much as I had on my first day, a cheap tie and a backpack. I hung up the phone. I didn't wait for him to respond. As I walked out of the visitor's room, I could hear him through the glass, pounding on the barrier and screaming my name. It was the last time I'd ever see him. Back at the office, the final stage of the Vance protocol was underway. I walked into the corner office, Thorne's old sanctum. The obsidian desk was gone. In its place was a large, circular wooden table, a gift from the local carpenters' union. I'd had the walls, which used to be covered in mirrors and Thorne's awards, repainted a soft, warm white. I sat down and looked out at the skyline. I realized I didn't want this office. Not for myself. I called Martha in. Martha, I'm moving my primary operations back to the 10th floor. I said, I want to be near the IT and research teams. This office, it's too big for one person. I want you to turn it into a community lounge and a resource library for the junior staff. Martha smiled. Thorne would have had a stroke if he heard that. Thorne is the past, I said. We're building a firm where the intern feels as valued as the executive. Because a building is only as strong as its foundation, and Thorne spent his life trying to live on the roof without a ladder. I spent the rest of the day signing the final papers for the firm's transition. We were no longer Sterling and Associates. We were now Vance and Partners. The Partners wasn't just a corporate name, it was a promise. As the sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows across the office, I saw a familiar face at the door. It was the young assistant who had tried to help me on my first day, the one who told me to take the service elevator. Mr. Vance? He asked, looking nervous. Call me Leo, I said, and come in. I hear we're looking for a new head of junior relations. Interested, he looked like he'd just won the lottery. As he stepped into the room, I realized that this was the real ProRevenge. It wasn't just about putting a bad man in jail. It was about creating a world where men like him could never thrive again. I walked out of the building at 7 p.m. The street was busy with people heading home. I stood for a moment, looking up at the 42nd floor. The lights were on, but they didn't look cold anymore. They looked like home. I thought back to that lukewarm coffee Thorne had thrown at my chest. I thought about the $100 bill in the puddle. It felt like a lifetime ago. I'd learned more in those 3 weeks as an intern than I had in 4 years of business school. I learned that power isn't about how many people you can command. It's about how many people you can empower. I learned that the jackals of the world are only as big as the shadows they cast. I pulled out my phone and sent a final text to my father. Project 11 complete. The skyline is back in safe hands. Coffee's on me next time. I walked toward the subway, blending in with the crowd. I was just another guy in a suit, heading home after a long day's work. But as I passed a puddle on the sidewalk, I couldn't help but smile. The rent was finally paid. And there you have it, folks. Marcus Thorne thought he was the lion of the concrete jungle, but he forgot that a lion is nothing without its pride. Leo Vance went undercover, took the insults, and hauled the ice just to prove that at the end of the day, a bully is just a coward with an obsidian desk. Seeing Thorne in that oversized orange jumpsuit after he laughed at a cheap tie, that is the ultimate ThreadVerse satisfaction. Leo didn't just take Thorne's firm. He took his legacy and turned it into a sanctuary for the very people Thorne tried to destroy. Reinstating Martha and the others wasn't just business, it was justice. If you cheered when Leo tucked that $100 bill into Thorne's prison pocket, do me a huge favor, smash that like button. It really helps us grow this community of justice seekers and lets us keep bringing you these massive, 100% real stories of ProRevenge. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. We've got more corporate takedowns, more entitled Karens, and more absolute karma coming your way every single week. Before we head out, I want to hear from you. Have you ever worked for a Marcus Thorne? How did you handle the toxicity? And did you ever get to see justice served? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. Remember, always be kind to the intern. You never know who owns the building you're standing in. I'll see you in the next one.